example, in certain places in Arizona, it's about $4,500 a month. If you're interested in sober living, so more of the alcohol abuse and drug abuse patients who are in intensive outpatient programs, another good way to do that is calling. So that's the first thing that's going to give you most likely to have those opportunities. I was talking to David Green for a while, and he asked what we were doing, and I told him, I was like, yeah, we're investing in assisted living. And he looked at me, he's like,
hi everybody, Jose Luis Morales. Welcome back to another episode of the Morales Group Show. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Alex Schole, based out of Colorado Springs. And today he is going to be teaching us how to invest in assisted living homes. We're going to talk about how to invest in assisted living homes if you want to just buy the asset and rent it out to an operator, or if you want to buy the asset and also run the operations yourself. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of that. We can touch a little bit on assisted living facilities, memory care, behavioral care, sober living, ventilator homes, and hospice. Mainly, we'll be talking about sober and assisted living. Welcome to the show, Dr. Alex. How are you?
hey, Jose, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the time to get on the podcast and chat more and hopefully, teach folks a little bit about assisted living homes.
I love it, man. This is a topic that I've been wanting to learn a lot, but I've never really found like a clear roadmap as to how to get in contact with maybe some of these operators or what type of homes make the perfect homes for assisted living homes. So for our viewers, Dr. Alex, who don't know who you are, who is Dr. Alex, and then how did you get involved in real estate investing and specifically investing in assisted living homes?
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I'm a family medicine physician in the Air Force. I'm stationed here in Colorado Springs at Schriever, now Space Force Base, used to be Air Force Base. So practice family medicine out here. I'm a husband, father, have a almost 3-year-old son who keeps me really busy. Love the outdoors, and then whatever free time I have goes into investing in real estate. So have a little bit of experience in multiple different asset classes. Have a long-term rental at our prior duty station at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. We had 3 short-term rentals. We sold one recently and have 2 more. We have 3 assisted living homes, which will be the focus on today. And then we have a house hack. We actually house hack our primary residence here in Colorado Springs to help live mortgage free here in Colorado Springs, which is pretty cool as well. I've always been interested in real estate. I was that kid who would grab those like booklets of houses for sale that used to exist. I don't know if they still do since we have Zillow and Redfin, but I would always look through those. Was just really interested in real estate as a whole. And then long story short, when I went to medical school in Richmond, Virginia, I got a signing bonus through the Air Force. And my dad said, hey, how about you consider taking that signing bonus and buying a property with it, fixing it up while you're in med school and renting it out. And my dad didn't have a lot of experience with real estate investing, and I did what every kid typically does, and I didn't listen, unfortunately. And so anyways, but the seed was planted at that point in time. And so I had thought about that throughout. So I ended up getting some roommates while I was in med school and just kind of splitting the rent payments for the apartment and kind of seeing, hey, this is really helpful for saving some money. And then when I started residency in Florida, I knew I was going to buy my first, what would ultimately be our first rental property at that point. So we bought a home there that we did like a live-in flip light and went ahead and rented that out. And that's been a long-term rental there. Got into the Airbnb game, short-term rental game for a while. Just like I said, just recently sold a property in Georgia last springtime. And then we have one up in the mountains, a really cool geodesic dome property up in the mountains here in Colorado, and then house hack our basement as well. And then the 3 assisted living homes. Assisted living, really cool. Sorry, Jose, go ahead. I feel like I was
No.
just going to go on a roll.
No, keep going.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So assisted living just kind of fell into that niche. And so I'm in a mastermind called the War Room, which is through From Military to Millionaire. If any military folks are listening to this, and I've been in that for about 2.5 years now. And we meet every Tuesday night. And one of the folks that's in the mastermind with me, his name's Luke. He brought up the idea of invested in assisted living homes. And the mastermind is all about taking action. And I think that's what's so important is you have to be willing to take action when it comes to investing. We can sit there and analyze all day, but you really just have to take action, get the ball rolling. So one day we're in one of these meetings and Luke is like, hey guys, I'm interested in assisted living. And part of it during our weekly calls is the hot seat. And so he brought a deal he was working on and he was telling us all about this assisted living home. And I was sitting there, I was like, gosh, this sounds too good to be true. And I even told him, I'm like, look, this sounds too good to be true. He was talking about buying this home in Arizona and leasing it out to operators on a commercial lease, and how he was going to make $3,500 worth of cash flow on this one house in Arizona, and was not going to be responsible for the maintenance and the care of residents and so forth. So I heard that, got really interested, and decided to see how things would play out for him. And so we followed up over time and became really good friends. And so we decided to partner up and buy a home. And then ultimately that led to me bringing in my real estate partner, Charlie, as well into the fold. And so we started Open Range Capital, where we've been buying assisted living homes going forward. And we do it in a kind of a unique way where we actually buy the real estate and lease that out to the operator. So we're not involved at all in the day-to-day care of taking care of these residents or filling up the home or anything like that. We lease it out on a commercial lease and go from there. And we can dive much more into the details in regards to that if you'd like.
Well, let's get started by just if I wanted to invest in assisted living homes, what type of properties generally make for better assisted living properties? Like, do they have to
Yeah.
be near hospitals? Do they have to have a certain population? Do they have to have a certain amount of bedrooms? Do they have to be single story, two-story, newer construction, older construction? What does that look like?
Yeah, Jose, great question. I'll back up first real quick and just kind of talk about what is assisted living, and then we'll dive into what makes a good property. And that's going to be a little bit location dependent, but there's some general principles that will apply wherever you're at. Assisted living, for folks who aren't interested, folks probably hear assisted living and they immediately think these big box nursing homes. That's not the case. So these are residential assisted living homes. So these are single family homes that have been converted into an assisted living home. There's a lot of different kind of asset classes within the broader umbrella of assisted living. There's of course assisted living for elderly care, which would be taking care of, grandma and grandpa who need some assistance with activities of daily living, bathing, toileting, feeding themselves, etc. Those are typically folks that are in these assisted living homes. It's not a medical home; they're not getting significant medical care, but they need some help with those activities of daily living. So that's kind of your typical residential assisted living home. There's memory care homes, which are for folks who need a little bit more help with things such as dementia. Alzheimer's dementia is a big one. Those folks go into these memory care homes where there's a higher caregiver to resident ratio, and there's some other things to make it a much safer environment and more cognitively stimulating environment for them going forward. So that would be a memory care home. There's sober living homes, which would be for folks who are struggling with alcohol abuse, drug abuse, who are in intensive outpatient programs where they're going to a clinic all day and then they come and they stay in these homes. So that would be more of your sober living or transitional living home. There's behavioral homes for kids who have autism, for example, or Down syndrome, and they need a home to live in to grow and thrive. There's other things like ventilator homes, which I don't have much experience with, but that would be for folks who are on ventilators long term because it's very expensive for them to stay at the hospital. And so they put them in these specialized homes called ventilator homes, where they spend time on the ventilators and recover there at the home as well. So a lot of different assisted living homes. So we primarily focus on residential assisted living for elderly care / memory care, and then sober living as well. That's where we're at this point. And I think there's a huge potential for investments in these residential assisted living homes going forward. To answer your question, Jose, there's numerous things that make a house kind of stand out from an assisted living perspective. Ideally, you're wanting a ranch level home or a single story home that's large with as many bedrooms and bathrooms as you can get. And there's multiple reasons for that. Of course, ambulating is an issue for some of these folks. And so having a single story home takes out the hazards of having stairs. Having multiple bedrooms and bathrooms allows you to have the opportunity to rent out these rooms privately. And so you're able to charge a little bit more if it's a private room. So as many private bedrooms and bathrooms as you can be really beneficial from that perspective. Oftentimes you want a house that has a big kitchen and a big dining area as well. A lot of times that's where the residents are going to come together, is going to be at these meals. And so having a big dining room or kitchen or area for them to all eat their meals together can be really beneficial as well. Typically, ballpark, you want to think about having roughly 300 square feet per resident. So, for example, in Arizona, you can have 10 residents. That's the max, that's the cap. So, you would be looking at a 3,000 square foot house, ideally, is what you would be looking at from that perspective. And so that's kind of just a good rule of thumb. You're going to need to have grab bars in place, depending on different municipalities and restrictions. You may have to widen some of the doorways to make sure a wheelchair can come through. You may need a wheelchair ramp. It just all depends on different locations, what the restrictions are, and what you need in terms of getting a license. So hopefully that helps answer your question a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What's considered a decent amount of bedrooms? Are we talking about like 6 bedroom houses, 7 bedroom houses,
Yeah,
10 bedroom
yeah,
houses?
yeah, great question. It really depends what your goals are and what market you're going after. So, ideally, if you have more bedrooms and you're in a market that can support paying private pay as a private bedroom slash bathroom combination, which is going to be a little bit more expensive, the more of those you have, the more income you're going to make on the property. Of course, some folks still have beds for Medicare that are coming in. That's going to pay a little bit less and be a little bit more difficult sometimes to get residents in, but that's typically, going to be more shared bedrooms because they're not going to pay as much for that spot in terms of being a resident in that home. So it just really depends. Now, I think you would want to have at least minimum, say you're going to have a 10 bed home, you're going to want to have at least 5 bedrooms. And then you're still going to be sharing all 5 of those rooms. So there's going to be 2 residents in each of those rooms. So ideally, if you can get closer to 6, 7, 8 bedrooms, that would be helpful. So then you could have a mix of private rooms and shared rooms, and sometimes you'll get a couple that's coming in as well, and then they'll go into a private room, of course. So it's good to have those as well. And then you also want to be thinking about caregivers, and the cost to hire quality caregivers is pretty substantial. So if you can offer a caregiver residence or a room that's for the caregivers, that can help. If there's a live-in caregiver, it can help decrease cost of operating these homes. That would be more so if you're also owning the real estate and owning the operation as well.
Got it. How like let's say I just want to buy the real estate, and let's say I find a ranch home with like 6 bedrooms. How do I find out how do I find these operators that
Yeah.
could potentially lease the properties from me? And then how do I also find out like what I can charge as well too?
Yeah, great questions. Great questions. So the thing I always tell folks if they're wanting to get started is first finding a realtor who specializes in residential assisted living homes. That can be really helpful. They do exist, and finding them can be beneficial for multiple reasons. One, they typically understand what are the restrictions or what are the requirements in order to get licensing, so they can really help you out with that piece. They also understand what areas you can operate these homes in. Different cities, different municipalities are going to have restrictions on distance. So Jose, if you opened up a home right down the street from me, I might not be able to get a license if I'm within a certain distance requirement. So it depends on where you're looking at, but 1,500 feet as the crow flies could be that. So a realtor can be helpful from that regard. In terms of the operator piece, they often typically will have a Rolodex of operators that they're working with or have worked with before. And so that can be really helpful because they already have experience with these folks. They can recommend them and you interview them. Some other ways that we've had success finding operators, we've started a Facebook group where we're kind of building out a group where hopefully we'll be able to connect realtors, operators, and caregivers and investors on one group. So there's different Facebook groups that exist. That's one way to do it. I have a friend who operates a home. He'll find operators through like Indeed or LinkedIn, reaching out to folks in that regard. And then another way to do it is just call up some of the homes in the area where you're looking to invest and see, hey, are they looking to expand? Are they looking for more work? Sometimes these caregivers can't really get full-time hours in one home and they'll be looking for another. And so that's an option as well.
Got it. And then, how do we find out like how much you let's say that you didn't want to operate the home. How do you find out like what market rent for something like that would be? Like, are there
Yeah.
any rules of thumbs? Like, if rent is 2,000, you can charge double or two and a half times or three times or what?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great if there was a rule of thumb like the 1% rule or something like that. Nothing like that exists that I know about. So if anyone's created that or wants to, let me know for sure. Some ways you can do it though is there's a website called Genworth, and I can send this to you after that folk can look at. It's called Genworth, and it gives you the opportunity to look in different municipalities or even zip codes and narrow it down to see what the average pay is or what the average monthly cost is for these assisted living homes. So you can get a rough estimate. Example, in certain places in Arizona, it's about $4,500 a month per resident. So if you get 10 residents in there, you're looking at $45,000 gross income for that home. It's and that sounds amazing, and it truly is. But there's a lot of other things that go into that. But you can take an idea of say, hey, if we're getting $45,000 per home, I would think you could probably lease that out to an operator for anywhere from $7,000 to $9,000, maybe 10 a month, depending on the operator experience, how quickly they can keep the home filled or fill up the home if it's vacant, and those sorts of things as well. So it really just depends on market and what the market rate is. The average monthly rate is going to vary greatly depending on if you're looking for an assisted living home in California or you're looking at one in Alabama. I mean, it's just going to be a lot different in that regard.
Not only that, but I think the good thing about this niche is that it's going to be a growing niche over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, but with increased prices and increased interest rate, it's a way to still be able to cash flow on properties, and still be able to provide a great service for people. Do most operators or the ones that you've run into, do they have any preference on buying or leasing? Like meaning, like, are
Yeah.
most of them owning? Do some of them just want to lease, or what do you kind of
Yeah.
see, like a 50-50 or?
Yeah, I think it's probably about a 50-50, maybe even shifting more towards more wanting to lease at this point. Reason B is a lot of these operators have to buy the business too. And so if you're going to buy one of these homes that's already operating, typically it's sold as the real estate and also sold as the business. And so a lot of times the operators are buying the business. We typically aren't buying the business because we're not operating the business, right? And so we can't just sink $100,000 plus the down payment for the home and make the numbers work. So oftentimes the operators are buying the business and then they don't have the cash reserves or they're scared of the real estate market and where interest rates are right now to go ahead and buy the real estate. So I'd say right now it's probably leaning more towards 60-40 of folks that are wanting to lease, from my experience, than folks who want to buy the real estate and own the operation. That's certainly the most lucrative approach, would be to buy the real estate and own the operation, but there's certainly plenty of people who are still looking to lease and go from there just for that reason. Just typically, just large upfront costs, because you're often looking at 25 to 30% down since these are commercial properties given the current climate of the market.
Got it. Um, so are these, you said commercial lease earlier, um, today, but are they residential? Like, can you finance these with traditional loans, or do they have to be financed with commercial loans, or what type of financing if you're going to buy one of these properties?
Great question, Jose. It depends. So if you're gonna own the real estate, own the operation, you can get an SBA loan. There's a little bit more financing flexibility if you own the real estate and also own the business. If you're going to own the real estate, lease that out to an operator, it's typically commercial financing. So you need to get a commercial loan on that, and the terms they just differ greatly. I mean, the market is interesting right now. Even a bank that we've used for 4 deals came back and they're like, hey, instead of requiring 25%, now we're going to have to do 30 to 35% down, just because of the market, And so we've been looking more for seller finance opportunities. There's a lot of mom and pop assisted living homes and operators, and so looking more for those is an option as well. But yeah, typically you're looking at a commercial loan product, and having to go down that route.
And then for these assisted living homes, are you guys finding ones that are already up and running and just buying the real estate, or are you guys buying properties like in a traditional neighborhood where you guys are converting them into assisted living facilities? And what are the pros and cons of doing it one way versus the other?
Yeah, yeah. So the four that we have in our portfolio, those have all been active operating assisted living homes. Uh, Three of them were vacant. One already had an operator and had residents in place. And so they've already met all the requirements that were needed to obtain a license, which is really important. I think if you had the time, if you had the capital, much more lucrative approach would be, could you buy a home and renovate that into an assisted living home, and then find your resident and place them in there? That would certainly be the most cost effective strategy. However, it can get a little bit tricky based off what renovations need to be done to the home and so forth, of course. So that makes it a little bit difficult. These have all been operating assisted living homes, and we knew that they could get the license, and knew that they were licensable with not too much overhead. Another thing to keep in mind is oftentimes you have to put sprinklers and fire suppression systems into these homes. And that is very expensive and way more complicated than it seems. We're doing that right now for one of our homes, and it just seems like one thing after another for these sprinklers. And so sometimes, if you're able to find a home that already has a sprinkler system in place, already has a fire monitoring system in place, that'll save you a little bit of headache as well.
Does buying a assisted living facility that's already up and running, does that typically get sold at a markup or a premium versus a discount? And if so, like how much could somebody expect to pay as a premium
Yeah.
versus getting something that you have to do from scratch?
Yeah. Also a good question. It's definitely going to be marked up at a premium. Unfortunately, as with, I feel like every answer, it's going to depend on location for you.
Mhm.
And it's going to depend on how much work goes into getting that license. So sometimes the license stays with the home in particular. And so those will sell for a little bit more of a premium because that house can already be licensable. Sometimes the license sticks with the business. And so if you bring a new operator in, then that license sticks with that operator. And so the operator that's coming in has to do all those licensing requirements and go from there. I don't have an idea on the actual markup amount, but it is marked up. Now, keep in mind, you do typically still have to go through a appraisal process. And so we have seen some discrepancies in homes that are marked up far more significantly than they should be, that are never going to appraise anywhere near what these folks are asking for just because they have that capability to be licensed. And that's ridiculous. It would be more worthwhile to pay a premium for a home that's already converted, already has residents in place, and already has some sort of operation in place, regardless of if you're going in and you're switching out the operator or something else. That's going to be way more beneficial than just buying a house that's vacant that could have the license, if that makes sense. And so I would pay more of a premium for a home that already has residents in place, that's already licensed, that we're just either sticking with the operator that's already there or bringing a new operator in who's going to, for example, convert it from a residential assisted living care home to a memory care home, which will then be able to bring in more income.
Got it. Being that you're in the medical field, are there any associations for operators or for professionals in that industry? Like, so for example, like for real estate agents, there's the Association of Real Estate Agents. For
Yeah.
attorneys, there's the Bar Association where people can go bar meetings. Are there any associations that would be more tailored towards these types of operators or people in the nursing assisted living niche?
Yeah, there's one. I'm blanking on the name right now. I think it's like Residential Assisted Living Network or something like that. We're really trying, honestly, we're trying to build that, because it doesn't really exist. And we have a lot of folks reaching out to us to learn more about how we're doing it. And this is something that could be done anywhere. And so if folks are interested, I can certainly give you that information, how they can connect with us. But there's not a whole lot of networks that exist. There's one that's called MD Senior Living. My friend Dr. Krishnan started that. That's more for doctors who are interested in assisted living. I have a community of doctors and real estate investors called Physicians and Properties, but there's not one thing that's like comprehensive that I know of, except for maybe that residential assisted living network, which I honestly am not a part of. That exist out there. So that's kind of the hard spot. Is there's a lot of almost fragmentation in terms of network that exists. There's not anything that I know of that connects investors, operators, caregivers all in one locale. And so that
Got
would
it.
be really beneficial, and realtors as well.
What I was going to tell you, doctor, is recently I came across, we deal with a lot of professional fiduciaries, people that work with attorneys and the court. And oftentimes they have to send their clients to assisted living places
Yeah.
and then sell the property for them. And I ended up talking to one of them. And she's like, "Oh, yeah, I've got this gal that I forgot the name of the company, but she was like, all she does is help me place clients in assisted living facilities." And I
Yeah.
interviewed her on my podcast, and what her job was to either place these clients in facilities or individual homes. And I was like, oh my God, like
Mhm.
this is almost like the perfect relationship for something
Yeah.
like this, where if she's the one placing them, she probably knows a lot of the operators in town as
Mhm.
well, too. So I'm guessing that, and she said that she had relationships with other people who do the same thing as her in different parts
Yeah.
of the country, but almost like a relationship with like that would probably be the right relationship to connect you with some of the different operators, I would imagine, as well too.
Yeah, it would be. That's typically a placement agency. There,
Placement,
if
yeah.
you've seen the commercial called "A Place for Mom," or heard of the business "A Place for Mom," that's what they do as well. They're trying to connect. Hey, I have a resident or I have a patient who needs a care home, and they're trying to connect that piece. So that's called a placement agency. Great business. They, quite lucrative business, and they are often a good point of contact. So that would be something I'd also recommend. Thanks for bringing that up. For folks who are looking to find more operators, reaching out to some of these placement agencies can be helpful. Excuse me. And if you're interested in sober living, so more of the alcohol abuse and drug abuse patients who are in intensive outpatient programs, another good way to do that is calling the clinics. So typically, money flows from the government to the clinics, from the clinics to the homes, and so calling the clinics can be helpful to find operators for more sober living, transitional living perspective.
Got it. I don't know if you have any insight on this. I imagine that you have somewhat of insight, especially if you've decided to go more of the buying the home and leasing it out to an operator. What does it take to run one of these operations? Like, if I wanted to run the operation, like, is it something that could be scaled out where there's little input on my end? Is it something that requires a lot of energy on my end?
Yeah.
What are some of the profit margins? Who are the key players or team members that you would need in order to run maybe an assisted living facility?
Yeah, absolutely. No, have a good bit of insight on this. We were just analyzing two homes that were actually right next to each other where we were going to own the real estate and own the operation. And it ended up not working out, but we did a lot of research in regard to this. I'm active duty. My two partners are also active duty, are very full time jobs. And so we've stayed a little bit away from the operations piece at this point, but we would love to get in the operations in the future. The ideal setup would be this: you have a property manager who runs the day to day of the home. So that property manager, so essentially, Jose, you would be the CEO. Then you would have the property manager. That property manager is the one who's going to hire the caregivers, kind of help run the day to day operations of that care facility. Then you have the caregivers. Typically, you're going to need two of these per shift, depending on how much care is needed or how many residents you have in the home. It's going to depend. But a couple caregivers, those are typically paid hourly, and they're going to be the ones that are providing the care to the elderly patients during the day and at night, and also oftentimes doing the cooking, cleaning, medication management, bathing, toileting, all that sort of stuff. So all the caregiving is going through them. The property manager is the one that oversees them. Oftentimes, it's like, as I mentioned before, it's difficult for all of them to have a full-time job in that regard. So oftentimes you can get caregivers who can work at multiple homes, and a property manager can oversee multiple homes. So in a perfect world, you'd have a property manager who's overseeing multiple homes and reporting to you, Jose, as the CEO of this company, and then the caregivers are working under her. It sounds like that's easy. It's not. There's a lot that goes into the regulations. There's a lot that goes into caregiving. There's a lot of turnover with caregivers, especially as the labor market kind of is what it is right now, and these folks are certainly not paid enough for the job that they do. So there's a lot of turnover in that regard. So it can be a little bit tricky, but in a perfect world, that's the way that you could run it and make it semi more passive for you. There's also franchise models which are really helpful. So you can get connected with a franchisor and be a franchisee where you operate in a specific area, and they help you with the day-to-day aspect. They help you with hiring. They help you figure out regulations. They help you get the license. All those sorts of things that can be really helpful as well. There's a little bit of upfront cost, but they've already built all those systems for you, so that's going to help you expedite in terms of an operations perspective. In terms of margins, I don't own the real estate and the operations, but I have friends that do, and it's not unusual for them to make $4,500 to $5,000 per month per resident. Have 10 folks in the home, so you're looking at $45,000 to $50,000 gross. And the expense ratio is typically about 60% towards expenses, and then your net income is going to be about 40%. So
40%.
they're cash flowing $12,000 to $15,000 per month in one of these homes.
Does that
Um,
expense ratio include the real estate as well too? I would imagine it
yeah,
does.
it would typically. It would typically. Of course, that's going to be higher if you're leasing it out, so your cash flow is going to be a little bit less if you're the operator who's paying a lease fee to lease out the home. But then you're not having to deal with that upfront down payment costs and so forth as well. So not unusual for folks to do that. It really depends, and is tricky to maintain that sometimes because of course folks pass away. It can be a little bit more difficulty in terms of turnover and getting new residents in the home and those sorts of things as well. The marketing piece and the placement piece is a whole another conversation. But you're typically working with folks like those placement agencies, and you're paying them a referral fee, which can be a couple months rent and so forth as well. So there's a lot of pieces that go into that, but if everything was working out perfectly, you could certainly make 12, 15, $18,000 a month in cash flow on one home, depending on your market.
Got it. Now, where do you find these listings? Like the ones that are already assisted living facilities, are you just shopping for them like on Zillow? Are these
Yeah,
off market types of opportunities?
yeah,
Are these properties that are listed on LoopNet? Like where do you
yeah,
typically find these listings?
yeah. All the above. The first thing you can do is find a realtor who specializes in it. They're going to have those listings. They're going to be the ones that are listing those homes. So that's the first thing that's going to give you most likely to have those opportunities. We found some on LoopNet. We've found some on Crexy. We've found some on Redfin, Zillow, etc. One way to do that would be setting a filter to find homes that are 5+ bedrooms and 4+ bathrooms or something like that. So you already know, hey, this would work potentially as an assisted living home if I renovated it, or hopefully, ideally, it's going to come up with some assisted living homes that are available. Other ways to do it is through Facebook groups. There's multiple different assisted living Facebook groups, like I discussed earlier. Some folks are selling in there from time to time as well, so that can be an option. And then off market is always an option, an opportunity too.
Got it. Which are uh, memory care, uh, sober living? Which ones are easier to operate? Would you say?
Well, easier to operate would be sober living. I sighed a little bit when you asked that question because there's been some fraud that's happened in Arizona, and so there were, long story short, some operators who were frauding the system and looking like they were operating these homes and getting paid, and they weren't actually operating these homes. So they paused through a payment. Essentially paused all payments through the government to a certain subset of these clinics. And so that's made it a little bit more difficult from that perspective. From an operations piece, day to day, way easier to do a sober living or transitional living home because you're not typically having to, these folks can go to the bathroom by themselves, cook for themselves, all those sorts of things. And you're oftentimes transporting them to the clinic for intensive outpatient therapy, where they spend the majority of the day doing that intensive outpatient program, which is oftentimes, counseling, working with medication management for drug abuse, for alcohol abuse, working with a psychiatrist, those sorts of things, and then learning life skills to transition back out of these homes into society.
Yeah.
Memory care is going to have your dementia patients, and so it's going to be really heavy hands-on, a lot of care, a lot higher of a caregiver to resident ratio, a lot more difficulty from a memory care perspective.
What about these commercial leases? We talked off camera about one that you did recently, where I think you offered a little bit of an incentive up front, and then it went up. What do these commercial leases typically look like?
Yeah, so we have for our homes, for our four homes, we have 3 to 5 year commercial leases. I wouldn't say triple net, but they're close. We're still responsible for mortgage, taxes, and then insurance on the home, not overall insurance for the care of the residents, just insurance on the home. So that's what we're responsible for. The operator is responsible for everything else, utilities, maintenance, etc. We offer a home warranty to help with that, to help offset, if something were to break or something like that within the home. And then they're responsible for the caregiving. They're responsible for insurance in terms of the residents, which can be a little bit costly as well. And so that's kind of their piece. Typically, like I said, 3 to 5 year leases structured that way, and typically a some sort of annual percentage increase. We have a 3% annual increase in our leases, and in terms of the ramp up period, that's what you were alluding to. Typically, you want to give these operators a ramp up period. And that's because, especially if it's a vacant home, it takes time to put residents into these homes. It takes time to get the licensing in place. It takes time to do any renovations that you may need to do and so forth. And so we typically will offer a ramp up period depending on what type of home, depending on how many residents are there. But for example, it might look like you give them the first month free, and then you do a couple months at half price rent, and then 3/4, and then full, and then go from there. And that way it gives them some time to recoup some savings, to ramp up. And then it gives you a little bit of leverage in the future when they come and they try and say, hey, the window's leaking. And you say, hey, look at the lease. And also, this is why we gave you a ramp up period. So you should have the funds to be able to fix that because it's their responsibility.
Got it. Can you give us an example of a nursing or assisted living facility that you bought recently? Like what the numbers look like, what you bought it for, what the mortgage is, um, what the rent currently is, etc.
Yeah. The latest deal we did actually was the first one we raised money for. So I'll talk about that one because that was a fun experience. That was an off market deal in Arizona that was assisted living, 10 bed, already operating with 7 residents in it, that was going to be converted to a memory care home. By the operator who's coming in. That operator is working through a franchise. So that is how he felt comfortable getting into the operations. And again, I can kind of hitting that franchise piece pretty hard because it can be really helpful from that perspective. And so we ended up doing was buying this home for $975,000. We ultimately got to seller finance this deal, so it was a 7 year or 25% amortization, 7 year fixed at 7%, 20% down. Typically, you're looking at 30 to 35% down on a 5 year fixed rate with a 25-year amortization typically. So a lot better loan terms for us. And then we brought in some investors for this deal. They're getting 10% simple interest, no ownership, no equity in the property, just 10% simple interest on their money. And then the operator, we did a ramp up period where they had the first month free. Then they did 2 months half off. They're doing 2 months at 3/4 of their lease fee, and then they'll go to their full lease fee. So 1 month at zero, 2 months at 5,500, 2 months at 8,500, and then full lease fee, which is $11,000 for this home with a 3% annual increase. All said and done, when we pay investors and pay the mortgage taxes and insurance, which is about $5,700, we're still going to cash flow about $1,000 per partner in that property, and there's 3 of us, so it's still going to cash flow about $3,000, paying investors, paying mortgage taxes and insurance, and paying our investors 10%.
I love it. What about liability? So,
Mm-hmm.
as a the owner of the real estate, how can you protect yourself in terms of if anything ever happens at that
Yeah,
property? Or
yeah.
does the lease cover that? Or do you need certain insurances? Or what do you recommend there?
Yeah, great question. The typically how it's set up, the lease has insurance agreement in there, so they have to get the insurance for all the residents, for all the caregiving. So the majority of the bulk of the liability would be on them. We have to get homeowners insurance for just like the structure, basically, or if you were going to buy any residential home. And so the insurance company that we work with, they're very familiar with the model, and so they are helpful in that regard. So we're covered from a liability perspective there, and also covered from a liability perspective in regards to what the operator's insurance is. And different states are going to have different insurance requirements as well. So it's definitely something to look into. And I'm certainly not an attorney, but that's how it's set up from that perspective.
Is there such thing as oversaturation, almost like the Airbnb like market, like how like somebody sees this as a nice niche and then everybody starts pouring their eggs into this? And then
No,
if there's not, what do you see as
yeah,
mistakes in this, or
yeah.
typical mistakes that you see people make when getting involved in assisted living facilities?
Jose, I think after this episode there may be some saturation, but no, there's not. I think this is a really great opportunity. We're currently actually 1 million beds short for these assisted living homes across the United States, and we haven't even hit the point where baby boomers are going into these homes. So the demand is very high. The demand is going to get incredibly high going forward. So huge opportunity in the residential assisted living space. It's hard. I mean, it sounds easy listening to me talk about this, but it's hard, and so that's going to keep a lot of investors out. It's very difficult to find these homes. It's very difficult to find good operators. It's just really difficult to get started, which is where it's helpful to have people that will help you along the way. But the difficulty of getting started makes it where I think it's going to prevent that bigger pockets effect, or prevent everybody from rushing into the assisted living market going forward, because it is really quite difficult. Um, Kind of interesting. I was thinking about this. My wife and I went to a Bigger Pockets meetup a few months ago in Denver, and we met David Green and Rob and all of them there. And I was talking to David Green for a while, and he asked what we were doing, and I told him, I was like, "Yeah, we're investing in assisted living." And he looked at me, he's like, "Man, assisted living, that like such a great opportunity, but it's so hard to get into," which is semi true, but also gave me a little bit of hope that, hey, there's still plenty of time for folks to get into the assisted living space, and there's plenty of need for really high quality 5-star homes that are going to provide exceptional care to these residents, which is what we're offering. So, in terms of roadblocks or difficulties, we've hit a lot of them. I mean, it's really hard to find good operators. It's really hard to find good caregivers, especially in the current market. And like I said, these folks, it'd be way easier to go down the street and flip burgers at Whataburger for about the same amount that you're going to be wiping somebody's butt in one of these assisted living homes. And so that's really difficult as well. And then the licensing and regulations are often switching or difficult to kind of discern what's going to happen in regards to that. And so there's a little bit of fear in that regard too. I think it's really important to just get connected with people who have done this before, and people who have different contacts and connections that are going to set you up for success and get you in contact with the right people or the right person in the city to figure out what regulations may be and so forth, to really set you up for success. And then again, the franchise model is an excellent way to do it too, because they've already built that out for you.
Got it. What about exit strategies for your company? What are you guys looking at some of these investment opportunities? You guys looking like long-term holds? Or are you guys looking at 7-year exits, 10-year exits? What are you guys
Yeah.
looking at?
Yeah, we're so from investor perspective, we're looking at 5 to 7 year cash out refinance, pay off the investor, keep the home. We're looking at long term holds, because I think that right now, in terms of our company, we want to collect as many of these homes as we can in a lease to own model, and collect that cash flow. And then we want to, in the future, ideally, when we're getting to the point of cash out refinance or investor capital, we want to start getting in the operating space ourselves, and figure out, hey, how can we build out that property manager caregiver team that we talked about earlier, so that we can also own the real estate and the operation. So right now we're trying to collect as many of these homes that then we'll have the opportunity to say, hey, we have 10, 15, 20 homes in these different areas, and we want to start operating them, and then getting that cash flow as well. So that's kind of what we're looking at long term.
Do you guys ever run into problems with the neighbors running these facilities in residential neighborhoods? And the reason I tell
Yeah.
you that is I sold the property to a sober living, or it wasn't a
Yeah.
sober. I think they were underage kids.
Yeah.
And then a couple of the neighbors were like pretty like upset that that type of home was operating in their neighborhood.
Yeah, we haven't run into any issues with that yet. I can certainly see where that would be more of an issue for transitional living, folks with alcohol, drug abuse, or for the behavioral homes for kids with, autism, for example, or different disabilities who need that. Oftentimes, picture grandma and grandpa going to bed at 6 o'clock at night, and they're pretty quiet, not going to be too rowdy. So oftentimes these homes are operating in neighborhoods you wouldn't even know that they're there, because it's elderly folks, and they're quiet, and they're not rampaging the homes or anything like that. So haven't ran into that issue yet. I could see that certainly more from a sober living perspective or behavioral home perspective.
I love it. Any final thoughts if somebody wanted to get into the assisted living space?
Yeah, just reach out to me. Happy to connect you with with our team and folks that we know. If you're a physician listening to this, I do have a Facebook group and a podcast called Physicians and Properties, where we talk a lot more about assisted living and just real estate investing in general, and how that can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want to. And then we do have a Facebook group where we're trying to build out that assisted living community as well, and I can send you that information, Jose, if you want to pass that on going forward. Folks can reach out to us, through any of the social media platforms. Physicians and Properties is everywhere. Our Instagram, my Instagram is ASCHLOE3 or ASCHLO3 as well. So happy to help anyone going forward.
I love it, Dr. Alex. So I appreciate your time. I want to say thank you. This was extremely insightful to us. For our viewers today, we had Dr. Alex Schole. We talked about how to invest in assisted living homes. We talked about sober living, memory care, assisted living. We talked about operating one versus just leasing out the property. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you feel that this episode will be helpful to somebody, make sure to hit that share button. Thanks again,
Absolutely.
Dr. Alex, and to our viewers, until next time.